that I was given to, inshallah. Shaykh Hamid Waqar was born into a non-Muslim family. He grew up as an American kid until he reached his high school years when he decided to research religion. He decided to search all religions that he could think of at that time, as he was only 16. The first religion that he looked into was called Hare Krishna, an idol worshipping religion originating from Hinduism. He decided it was not for him. He then decided to look into Christianity and Judaism. He found major problems in both of these religions, leading him to reject them. The problem that he could not overcome in Christianity was the belief in the Trinity. In Judaism, he had a problem with the Torah itself. The next religion that he decided to look into was Islam. He bought a Quran and a book describing the basic Islamic beliefs and practices. He was fascinated by these books, and the more he read, the more he wanted to become a Muslim. In the summer of 2001, Sheikh went to Lebanon, where he learned Arabic, and then in 2002, he entered the Islamic Seminary of Qom. He stayed there for 10 years, soaking up all the knowledge he could. In Qom, Sheikh specialized in Islamic jurisprudence. Towards the end of his studies, he participated in the Dars-e-Kharij, the highest level of Islamic jurisprudence, under the general tutelage of Ayatollah Mukarram Shirazi. When he left the Islamic seminary, he played the role of a resident scholar in communities in Sydney and Luton. Currently, he lectures throughout the world in addition to writing and translating Islamic material. So I would like to invite our esteemed scholar and our honorable guest, Shaykh Hamid Waqar, to the pulpit to begin his speech. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبو القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Please recite a loud salawat for the hastening of the reappearance of our living Imam Zaman alayhi salam. First, I want to thank the organizing committee here in this masjid in Seattle for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, a privilege to be here amongst you. I've actually known about your community for many years now, and I've wanted to visit for a long time, and alhamdulillah, inshallah, the poetry was beautiful right before the program. Maybe if we could add English too, that'd be good for the kids. But the Urdu and the Farsi was brilliant. So I want to give you just a brief introduction of what I'm going to be talking about over these next 5 nights or so. I think it's 5 or 6 nights. So So inshallah, the series that I want to talk about over these next few nights, and titling it, I Didn't See Anything But Beauty, of the words of Lady Zainab, salamu alayha. And we're speaking about the aftermath of Karbala, what happened after Karbala, leading to the Arba'in, inshallah. So tonight, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to go over a brief biography of Sayyidah Zainab and talk a little bit about her. And we'll also go over briefly the topics that we'll be covering over these nights. So tomorrow, inshallah, we'll talk about her bravery and the protective instincts that she had for her children and the children of the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam. And we're going to try to correlate that to today, to see how both the brothers and the sisters could learn from Sayyidah Zainab in protecting our children, and what that means in a society such as America, because it's definitely different than what it meant right after Karbala. So we want to see we could use her bravery in the way that we should in the position we're in right now. So one of the important things is learning about the situation we're in and how we could serve Islam in that situation. The third session, so the third night, inshallah, we're going to talk about how Sayyidah Zainab mourned for her brother, both right after his shahadat, right after Imam Hussein alayhi salam was martyred, and its effect on the people. So we're going to look at how she mourned. We're going to compare it to how we mourn and to how people mourn for Imam Hussein throughout the world. And we're going to draw comparisons, and we're going to see if we're doing it in the correct way or not. And then the fourth night, we're going to look at Sayyidah Zainab and her mourning again. We're going to look how the consequences of what happened in front of her eyes changed her to the point where she was unrecognizable for people who grew up with her. And that's the type of grief that she had and that we should try to emulate. Of course, we won't be able to that extent, but at least try. And then we're also going to look at how her grief affected the people of that time. So when she was dragged to Kufa, when she was dragged to Sham, when she spoke to the people, how did it affect them? Why did she address them the way that she did? And we're going to go over and we're going to look at a couple examples and see if we can learn from that. And finally, on the fifth night, which will be Arba'in, inshallah, the night of Arba'in, we're going to talk about the number 40 throughout in what's it called? Christianity, in Judaism, in Islam. And we're going to look at the different ways it's used, because it's used as a period of growth. So we have 40 days, we have 40 years, and we have, when you do something 40 times, there's all kinds of different ways that the number 40 is used in Islamic sciences. And we're going to examine them and see how they relate to us, inshallah. So if that's all right with you, please recite As-salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Also, just everyone has different speaking styles, of course. So for me personally, I don't like to give extra long speeches. So I hope that's not, negatively received. But I think the attention span for people doesn't extend beyond an hour. So, I'm going to try to speak as it's effective, and then when I see that people are drifting away and falling asleep, inshallah, we'll save the rest for the next night, inshallah. Okay? So, I wanted to start by mentioning a hadith about Sayyidah Zainab, salamu alayha. And the hadith I chose is from a Sunni source. And the reason I chose a Sunni source is because when we're praising someone who we respect from our own sources, it gives us assurances in our heart. But I feel it's more effective when we look and see praises from Sunni sources or sources that are in opposition to us or to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Why? Because it gives it a little more credibility, right? So when a Sunni, and of course Sunnis are not bad, we want to unify with Sunnis, there's nothing wrong with Sunnis, but Sunnis have a different perspective of the Ahlul Bayt than Shias do. When a Sunni praises the Ahlul Bayt or shows a tradition in praise of the Ahlul Bayt, that gives to me, that gives a little more weight to the argument, because it's against their ideology, right? So they're presenting something that goes in opposition to their ideology. And that means that there's no reason for them to lie about it. If it's not true, they wouldn't say it. If it's not in their books, they wouldn't say it. If they don't accept it as a valid tradition, they wouldn't mention it, because it goes, it's in favor of the Shia, right? So if that makes sense. So there's a Shaykh Sulaiman al-Hanafi. He says that one day the Prophet was delivering a lecture and he was on a pulpit, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam was crawling up the pulpit trying to get his attention. So the Prophet gave him his attention and addressed the crowd and told everyone, "O people, this is Hussein, whose father, mother, brother, and sisters are the best of people." Right? So this is in praise of the Ahlul Bayt, saying that these people are the best of people, the best of creation. And he continues, I'm breaking off, I'm not giving you the whole tradition, but I'm only mentioning the part about Lady Zainab. He says, and his sisters are Zainab and Ruqayya, and they will be in paradise. So here there's a tradition from a Sunni source that Lady Zainab will be someone in paradise. And of course we accept that, but from their words too, it's good to know. Now, today I just wanted to talk about a few aspects of her life, and inshallah we'll concentrate more on her mourning in the following nights, and more on the movement towards Arba'in. So one of the important parts of her upbringing is the family that she was born into. So she was born into the family of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the family of prophethood. She was raised by pure individuals. She was raised by the best role models possible, right? So it's, we take the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam as role models, at least we should, but we're not next to them. We're not living with them. We don't see them in their day-to-day interactions and activities, where Sayyidah Zainab had that, that opportunity to see Islam implemented in the most perfect way every second of the day. Right? So she was able to soak in all of this information and use it to excel, right? She also, one of the other aspects of being brought up in the family of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is tragedy. So she had to endure many types of tragedies throughout her entire life, not only in Karbala, before and after. So this is one aspect that's with the Ahlul Bayt. Okay. Now, due to all of this, she reached a very high level. Now we know that she's not ma'soom or ma'sooma like the Imams. Right? The Imams and the Prophets are born with isma, they're born infallible. Sayyidah Zainab is not at that level. Right? No one claims that she is. But it is highly possible and highly probable that she did reach lower levels of isma, or lower levels of infallibility. And in order to explain that, we have to know what infallibility is. So the way that the ulama describe infallibility is it's a combination of two traits. The first trait is taqwa, or piety. And we're going to get into taqwa and piety, inshallah, on the fourth night, and we're going to get into that in detail. So I'm not going to spend too much time now. But the clear definition, or a definition that you could get when you combine all the definitions together, is that piety means performing all of your wajib actions and staying away from all of the muharramat. Right? So if someone has these attributes where they perform all their religious duties and they don't sin, then they're pious, they're muttaqi, they have taqwa. Right? So isma is a high level of taqwa. So the more you keep taqwa, the longer that you retain it, the stronger it grows. And one of the consequences of taqwa is that sin becomes hard. So the more you abstain from sin, you get like a shield which will protect you from sinning in the future. It's like a reciprocal cycle, right? The more you abstain, then the easier it becomes to abstain, right? So that's one aspect of isma, of infallibility. The second aspect is a high level of knowledge, not only about Allah, but about the consequences of the actions themselves. So you see the consequence or the spiritual consequence of the action as you're committing it or before you commit it even. So when the Quran says when someone backbites, it's as if they're eating the dead flesh of their brother, right? We could only imagine that, and we still backbite, right? Because it's not in front of, it's not as if we're taking a bite out of the carcass of our brother, right? We don't witness that. But when you have infallibility, you witness that. You would never do that. If you see, you would never take a bite, right? So when they have that what's it called, that level of knowledge and that perception of the realities of our actions, they're able to abstain. So, can someone who's not born ma'soom reach this level? And the answer is yes, but not all the way up to the imams, of course. You could reach the bottom surface, right? And the bottom surface means you don't commit sins. So it's possible for a human being who is not born ma'soom to refrain from sins, right? This is a possibility, and people have done it. So Lady Zainab, salam Allah alayha, who's born in that family, who's raised in that family, who has high potentials for spirituality and religiousness, we believe that she reached at least these small, minor levels of isma, infallibility, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Now, in addition to that, right, there's a discussion of nature versus nurture in upbringing, right? So when you say nature, that means biological means. So when we're born in a way that our genes dictate our personality and our behavior. And the environment or the family that we're born into has no influence over us. Right? This is one side of the argument. The other side is that our genes don't have any influence whatsoever, and rather it's the environment or the family or the situation we're born into which influences us and creates the personality that we have. Now in Islam, we say that it's a mixture of the two, right? It's not one or the other. It's somewhere in the middle, right? So we are born with potentials, right? So some people are born with more potential than others. Some people are born with potentials of reaching higher levels of spirituality than other people, right? And we don't know what potential we have. There's no way we could find this out. But on the Day of Judgment, we'll be judged in accordance to the potential that Allah gave us, on one side. And then on the other side, there's many ahadith and there's many encouragements that Islam gives us to create an atmosphere of spirituality in the house. Why? Because that will influence the child and that will influence the people in the house to become more spiritual. It will help them adapt towards spirituality. So there's both. There's a potential that we're born with, and then there's the environment that we grow up in, right? And both of these influence us. So if you look at Lady Zainab, she had high levels of potential, and this is clear because of the heights that she's reached. And also the environment that she was born into was perfect. Right? There can't be a better environment for spirituality than what she was born into. So these two factors put together led to her to excel in spirituality and also in knowledge, which we'll get into. Now, some examples or I'll just give one example of an encouragement from Islam to create an environment conducive to spirituality in our house. And that's reading the Quran. So I know, alhamdulillah, all of us are Muslim and we pray and we read the Quran. But we might not read the Quran out loud in the house. So sometimes people don't, sometimes that's not a part of one's family culture where they just sit down and they recite the Quran in a loud voice in the house. But if you do that, there's huge consequences, huge benefits for the family if someone does that. And just reciting the Quran will affect the people in the household. So there's a tradition from our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, brighten your homes with reciting the Quran and don't turn them into graves. So that means in a house where the Quran is recited, this house is bright, it's illuminated. But if there's a house where the Quran is not recited, and maybe the person goes to the masjid and recites the Quran, it's not as if he never reads the Quran in his life, he just doesn't read it in his house. Right? So that house is as a grave, dark, gloomy. Right? It doesn't shine. And he continues. He says, surely the house in which a lot of recitation of the Quran takes place enjoys many blessings, and the members benefit from it. So the house becomes a house of spirituality. The atmosphere of spirituality is made. Thank you, brother. And the people who are living in this house will benefit from this spirituality. Right? Their spirituality will increase. So a father who recites the Quran in his house, right? One of the effects of this is that not only his iman, but his children and his wife and anyone else in his household will benefit from this spiritual atmosphere. And same thing for wives and children. Right? So when you're reciting the Quran in your house, not only are you benefiting, but all the members of your house are benefiting. And the Prophet continues, such a house shines for the inhabitants of heaven as stars shine to the inhabitants of earth. So just as you look up in the sky, maybe not in, I don't know, in Seattle, I haven't seen the sky yet, but at least in a less urban environment, if you look in the sky, you see all the stars, right? The people in heaven looking upon earth, the houses where Quran is recited, they look like stars, they're bright. Right? So it illuminates, there's an atmosphere that's created, even if you can't see it. On the day of judgment, the Prophet will complain to Allah about some Muslims who had abandoned the Quran, left it mahjura. Right? So if you don't recite it in the house, there will be complaints on the day of judgment. All these benefits to do it, and then these negative repercussions if you don't. Now, of course, the household that Lady Zainab, salamu alayha, grew up in was a house where the Quran was recited all the time. Right? It was recited maybe probably at least for a number of hours a day. So she benefited from this atmosphere. Also, another aspect in Islam that we have that the ulama of akhlaq give us, where they say that you should create an atmosphere conducive to the spiritual upbringing of your children, is that you need to lead by example. Right? And this is mentioned over and over again by the ulama of akhlaq. Right? And they give examples. They say, for instance, you want to teach your child not to lie. But when the phone rings and it's someone you don't want to talk to, you tell your child, say that I'm not home. Right? You're teaching by action your child to lie. And then you send him to Sunday school and they say, don't lie. Right? So there's a conflict. And your child looks at your actions, looks at your behavior, doesn't listen to your words. Another one is music, for instance. Your child comes to Sunday school, they say music is haram, music is bad, and then the parents listen to music. Right? The child is gonna observe and soak in the behavior of their parents more than they will Sunday school. So if you're sending your child to Sunday school to become spiritual, and then you're committing sins in front of him, it's not going to work. Right? You need to lead by example. If you want your child to become more spiritual and closer to Allah and improve in religion, you need to be an example. The parents need to be an example. Another one, watching negative TV shows, right? You want to teach your children not to watch these kinds of filth that they have on TV, and then you watch it. And they say, Daddy, you're watching it. Why can't I watch it? Right? And then this will lead them, when they get a little bit older, they'll watch. They have you as an example that, someone who's a little bit older could watch. So these are things, that we have a hadith, but mostly Islamic scholars try to point out. And again, when we look at Lady Zainab, salamu alayha, she had none of that. Her role models were perfect. They did what they said. They were ma'soom. Right? Her father was perfect. Her mother was perfect. Never committed a sin once. Right? She's seen every Islamic advice that they gave to her. she saw in practice? Right? What effects will that have on your child? If you could be such a role model for your child, that'll have effects. Right? Now, not only her spirituality, but she was also known for her intellectual capability as well. Right? We call her Aqila, which means wise. Right? She was known to be very smart. And this was not only in adulthood, but in childhood as well. So there's traditions we have about her as a baby. Right? As her as, I forget her exact age, but I'm assuming maybe 2 years old, where Imam Ali alayhi salam is teaching her numbers, teaching her how to count. Right? So he says, say 1. And she says 1. And then he says, say 2. And she doesn't say anything. And Imam Ali's like, you said 1, say 2. Why don't you say 2? And she says, the tongue that says 1 does not say 2. Right? The pure tawheed at 2 years old. Right? So she had this wisdom. And of course she knew how to count, right? But she had this wisdom where she showed it and it came out. And she was known, she was actually one of the best tafsir teachers in Medina. And she would hold tafsir sessions for the sisters in Medina. She was also known outside of only sisters, so it wasn't only sisters. Even brothers would come and ask her questions about tafsir. Right? So it wasn't only sisters. So for instance, Ibn Abbas would come and would ask her questions. Right? Ibn Abbas, who's famous, he has many traditions about tafsir. He's known to have asked her, he's narrated a few traditions that he quotes from her. So he went to her and asked her. Right? Now there's a question of where did this knowledge come from? How did she receive this knowledge? Was she born with it? Was it given to her by Allah and that's it? Right? Because we know all knowledge comes from Allah. Right? All of our knowledge comes from Allah. All of the knowledge of prophets also comes from Allah. Allah gives more knowledge to some people and less knowledge to others. But no matter how much we read, right, knowledge is nur that Allah puts in our heart. So this knowledge that we receive has to come from Allah. Right? Reading helps. Right? It creates the groundwork for Allah to give us knowledge. Right? But knowledge could come from other sources as well. So for instance, there's this story of a person by the name of Karbala Qasim. I don't know if you've known him. Probably some of the Iranians have heard his name before. So he's one of the people who's memorized the Quran. And one of my teachers in Qom actually had an interaction with him. And he told me the story, right? So the story is that this guy, his name was Qasim, and in Iran, when you go to Karbala and you visit Karbala, which many of the people of this community are doing right now, then you get the name in front of your name, Karbala'i, right? So they call you Karbala'i. Like Hajj, they say Karbala'i. So Karbala'i Qasim is Qasim who went to Karbala and did ziyarah once. So this brother, he was very religious. He was illiterate, couldn't read and write, but he was very religious. He cared about his religion. He cared about paying khums specifically. And 1 year, payment of khums was difficult for him, and he paid it anyways. And there's a whole story behind that, which I'm going to skip. But the result of that was that Allah gave him the memorization of the Quran. So Allah put that knowledge into his heart. And he memorized the Quran. And then he went to Qom to find out what happened. Because imagine one day you wake up and you have the Quran memorized. And you're illiterate. But I mean, imagine, you're not illiterate, but you don't have the full Quran memorized, and one day you wake up and you have it memorized. That would be amazing. You'd want to find out why. Right? You'd be like, what happened? How did this happen? And you'd go to Qom and you'd ask the scholars, I woke up one day and I had the Quran memorized. What did I do? Let me teach that to my kids so they can have it memorized. So he goes to Qom and the teachers meet with him, and one of my teachers was there. And he said that they realized he was illiterate and they gave him tests. So I don't know how familiar you are with memorizing the Quran, but there's different levels of memorization. So he passed the hardest levels of memorization of the Quran. Right? So they would just read like 2 or 3 words, and then he'd complete it from the middle of the Quran anywhere, right? And he'd just keep going. Then they would have him recite the Quran backwards, so word by word backwards. And he was able to do that, and that's a whole another level of memorization, right? That's really high level. And then what one of my teachers said is they wrote for him on a piece of paper a paragraph where some of the words were verses of Quran and some of the words were just normal Arabic words, right? So, if he was faking, he would just read it. And then he said, look, these words are from the Quran, but these words aren't. And I said, how do you know? He said, these ones light up and those ones are dark, right? So back to Lady Zainab, salam alayha. She had a high level of knowledge. And we know it was given to her from Allah. But how? Why? Right? What caused it? Now, there are some traditions that say that she was born, that she never had a teacher. Right? So we have some traditions from Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, where he's describing his aunt, and he describes her as one who has never had a teacher, that she just knew. Right? Now, what exactly that means, Allahu A'lam. But one of the things that increases our knowledge is piety, is taqwa. We mentioned taqwa a little earlier. But it's interesting that, again, the nature-nurture example I gave before with intelligence works as well. So people are born with higher IQs than other people. It's just potential. And then also what you do with that potential, how you exercise it, how you learn different learning programs, a Montessori program or whatever. All of these help you to increase your IQ and your academic ability as well. But there's another thing in Islam which we have as well, in addition, not taking its place, but in addition to this, is taqwa. So we have a verse of Quran which says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. So be pious, have piety in Allah. It says be wary of Allah. We'll go over the exact definition of piety later. But be pious, right? Perform your wajibat, stay away from the muharramat, and Allah will teach you. So if you perform your religious duties, Allah will give you knowledge. Allah will give you understanding. He'll give you basira, insight. Right? That's how one of the ways to increase knowledge is perform your religious duties. And if you don't believe me, try it. Try it and you'll see that you'll increase in wisdom. So if you're committing a sin, stop that sin and see the consequences. Right? Test for 40 days. Test it. And I promise you'll see the difference. Now, another thing that she was known for is she was active in relating traditions of her father and the Prophet. Right? So, and her mother as well. So she was an active person who transmits traditions. And that was very important at that time. And it's important for us now because some of the information that we have comes directly from her. So I'll give you a few examples. One of the traditions she related is the tradition regarding fadak from her mother. So when they took fadak from her mother, from Sayyidah Zahra, salam alayha. Right? Sayyidah Zahra argued with Abu Bakr, with the first Khalifa, saying, right there, argument was that prophets don't leave inheritance. And so fadak, you can't inherit fadak, and it becomes part of the Islamic, government. So she was saying, no, prophets do leave inheritance, right? And she mentions a verse of Quran, يَرَثُنِي وَيَرْثُ مِنْ عَلِي يَعْقُوب, where that's Prophet Zachariah praying for a son and an inheritor to inherit from me and the family of Yaqub. And Prophet Zachariah was a prophet, right? So she's using the Quran to argue her case. And of course, it's irrelevant because fadak was a gift in the first place that was gifted to her before the Prophet passed away. But she had to argue this, in order to make sense for them. And Sayyidah Zainab is one of the people who transmitted this tradition. So that tradition, which I'm sure you've read in books, is given to us from Sayyidah Zainab, amongst other people as well. Another one is a famous statement of her mother, ad-dar thumma al-jar, right? Ad-dar al-jar thumma al-dar. What's it called? The neighbor before the house. And that was after Sayyidah Zahra was praying all night, all the way into the morning. And her children were watching her pray and worship. And they noticed that she didn't pray for herself. The entire night she spent praying for other Muslims. And then they asked her about it. They said, why? Why do you pray? Why don't you pray for yourself? Why did you pray for all the other Muslims that you knew for the entire night and you didn't pray for yourself? And inshallah, in a few nights, we're going to get into why that's really important to pray for other people, other Muslims, when we talk about one of the aspects of Sayyidah Zainab's mourning. But in this case, Sayyidah Zahra responded and she said, first comes the neighbor, then comes the household. Right? And this is another tradition related by Sayyidah Zahra that's famous. And the third one that, just as an example, is when Imam Ali alayhi salam, after he was struck and he was leaving this world, he gave instructions of how to perform ghusl over his body to his sons, and Sayyidah Zainab was there as well, and she related this tradition as well. So she was active in the Islamic community. Now, that makes me come to the last point I want to raise today, which might be a little controversial, right? So I hope no one gets upset. But there's different, we have many different cultures in Islam. So we have, Islam is a religion which is practiced in many different countries. And these countries have their own cultures. So they practice Islam within the culture that they have. Right? And that's a whole another discussion that I don't want to enter now. But some of the cultures are very restrictive when it comes to women. And they want women to be completely away from the society, locked in a room, locked in a house, never seen. Right? So you have some people with regards to Sayyidah Zainab saying that Sayyidah Zainab was never seen before Karbala. That no one ever saw her. Everyone knew she existed, but only women saw her. No man saw her before, except for her husband, of course, before, Karbala. And I remember listening to some of the madah, the people who recite the Marsiya and the Latmiya, and they were mentioning this, and I was listening to them. And I thought it was a little strange with regards to Sayyidah Zainab, because we have reasons that show otherwise, right? So for instance, I mentioned earlier, Ibn Abbas has narrated many traditions from her, where Ibn Abbas goes to her and asks her about verses of the Quran. Now you might say Ibn Abbas is her cousin. They're related to each other, right? We're talking about men who are, strangers, or who are non-family members, right? But if it's a family member, it's fine, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, he's a cousin, he's not mahram to her, right? They could have married each other, right? There's no difference in the laws of mahramiyat between a cousin and a friend, a family friend or something, right? There's no exceptions to the rule. Now, I'm not saying cousins are, we should shun cousins and never talk to cousins. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying the laws of mahramiyat are the same between a cousin and a non-male relative, or a male relative, right? So when Ibn Abbas comes to her and asks her about the Quran and she explains it to him, it's someone who is a non-mahram is asking her. So at least Ibn Abbas saw her, right? Other instances is we also have traditions from other men as well who are narrating from Sayyidah Zainab. So it's not only Ibn Abbas. There's other men who narrate from her many traditions regarding Islam and the words of her mother and father. Also, on Karbala itself, right, we have the night of Karbala where Lady Zainab asks Imam Hussein, are you sure that the companions will be there for you and won't run away? Right? And then all the companions got upset. I'm sure you know, in Muharram you discussed this in detail. Right? The companions recognized Lady Zainab. The companions knew who she was. It's not as if it was a stranger. They knew her. Right? They recognized her. So they had to have seen her before. And not only the companions, the enemies. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam was being attacked, Shimr was addressing Zainab. He knew who she was. Right? It's not as if it's this woman who's never been seen before, walks in, opens the tent and comes out for the first time, and no one knows who she is. Everyone recognized her. Everyone knew who she was. So it seems that as if that the story of her being hidden away from society is probably not true. Now, what's that mean? Right? That means that maybe some of our cultures exaggerate some of the instances of Islamic history to suit their own culture, instead of actually trying to figure out what Islam really states. And that's something we should look into. And it's not something we're going to look into tonight, but it's something to keep in mind. If our culture is overstepping the religion, then that's wrong. But if our culture is within the religion, it's fine. Right? Cultural expression of religion is fine. But we can't have culture become more important than religion. Right? Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, ya Abu Abdullah. Inshallah, I want to relate one story before we close, and I think, is there going to be a Lutmiya tonight? People? Inshallah. So, I just want to make one comparison before we start the Lutmiya. And the comparison is between Abu Dhar al-Ghafari and Sayyidah Zainab, right? And the family of the Ahlul Bayt. So, Abu Dhar, everyone knows Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar was one of the strong companions of the Prophet. He was a staunch supporter of the Ahlul Bayt. Right? He was highly praised by the Prophet. And after the Prophet passes away, after his demise, Abu Dhar stands up for the rights of Imam Ali alayhi salam and is exiled and banned. Right? And he dies in exile. Right? And he was exiled most likely to somewhere in modern day Lebanon. Now, when he was in exile, he went with his wife and his son. And he goes to exile. And while he's in the middle of a desert somewhere, his son passes away. They don't have water, and they don't have any shrouds to shroud him with. They don't have any fabric. So you could imagine the situation he's in. He's in exile alone. His wife is crying. She just lost her son. And they can't bury him in an Islamic way. They don't have water to wash him, to do ghusl, and they don't have any pure clothing to shroud him with. So he's upset, she's upset, and he says, you know what, I'm going to find a village, and I'm going to ask them for water, I'm going to ask them for help. Right? So Abu Dhar, he walks, you can imagine it's a long distance, and he comes across a village somewhere in Lebanon. And he goes into this village, and he asks the first person he sees for help because his son just passes away. So they ask him who he is. And he says, I'm Abu Dhar, the companion, Sahabi Rasulullah, the companion of the Messenger of Allah. And when the people of the village hear this, they become excited. Right? This village just recently converted to Islam. So when they realize that one of the companions of the Prophet is in their village, they become ecstatic. They can't control themselves. They start kissing his hands. They start treating him with the most respect. Right? And they say, yes, of course we'll help you. And all of the men gathered. They brought water. They went to they went to go back with him to where his son is to help him bury his son. And they asked him, where's your wife? Is your wife there? And he says, yes, my wife is with my son right now. And she's mourning. And so they gathered all the women of the tribe too. And they all went, the women to console his wife, and the men to help with the burial. And when they get to the son, they ask, Abu Zar comes to help, and they say, no, you can't come and help. We heard from the Prophet that the first tier relatives shouldn't help in the washing, and they shouldn't be too close to the body of the deceased. So they did everything for Abu Dhar. They buried his son, and they had a majlis, and they did everything. Right? They did perfect. Now compare that to Karbala. Right? They treated, right after the Prophet died, they treated the companion of the Prophet with such respect. But only a few years later, how did they treat the family of the Prophet? What did they do with them? Right? When Abu Dhar reached the village, they kissed his hands. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam reached Karbala, they cut water from him. He died of thirst because of them cutting water. When Abu Dhar said that his son died and doesn't have a shroud, they got a shroud, they brought water to him. But when the family of Rasulullah died, they laid on the floor and no one covered them. Right? On the 11th of Muharram, when after all of the shuhada were martyred, right? The women were taken prisoner. Lady Zainab salamallahu alayha was taken prisoner. She was tied up with ropes, right? They tied her ropes behind her back so she couldn't use them. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he was in prostration from the night of Karbala, from the night of Ashura. He was in prostration. He didn't get up until the day afterwards when they forced him up. They chained him. They chained his neck. They chained his hands. They said there's a tradition that says that his neck brace was loose because he lost so much weight because when he was sick that they had to drive nails into his body to make sure that the neck brace doesn't slip off. Lady Zainab is watching this, right? They then, as if martyring all of their men wasn't enough, as if whipping them and hitting them and pulling their earrings and tying them up and dragging them through the desert wasn't enough. They wanted to psychologically torture the women of the Ahlul Bayt as well. So they could have went to Kufa in a straight line, but they decided to walk through the battlefield. So all the women have to look at their dead. All the women have to look at their husbands, their brothers, their nephews, torn to pieces. They walk through the battlefield. Zainab sees her sons. All of the women of Ahlul Bayt look and see their martyrs. And then when Sayyidah Zainab salamallahu alayha reaches the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, think about this. Take a picture to imagine. Imam Hussein, the perfect human being, is on the ground, decapitated without a head. 300 wounds on his body. Mutilated. Someone tried to take a ring from his finger and cut his finger off. Mutilated body. Imagine what Sayyidah Zainab is looking at. She can't control herself. She falls on her brother, face first. She didn't have hands to break her fall. They were tied behind her back. She fell face first. And it's been recorded in history that she fell face first on her brother, just as Abbas fell off his horse because he didn't have any hands to break his fall. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.